Presidential character and foreign policy. Biden versus Trump. What is presidential character? James David Barber, 1972, in his seminal treatise, The Presidential Character, Predicting Performance in the White House, argued that each person who has held the office of president brought to it a unique style, with each style reflecting a president's character. He believed presidents can be categorized as having positive or negative attitudes and as being active or passive toward their work. As such, he developed 4 categories for describing a president's character. These are 1. Active positive presidents who are adaptive and love the job and uses power as a means to achieve beneficial results. For example, FDR and Obama. 2. Active negative presidents who are compulsive and uses power for self-actualization, highly driven, aggressive, and preoccupied with whether he is failing or succeeding. For example, Johnson and Nixon.
Passive positive presidents are compliant, with a healthy ego and self-esteem, who seeks to be loved, focuses on modest achievements, and often reacts rather than initiates events policy, e.g. Reagan. 4. Passive negative presidents are withdrawn, with low self-esteem and an aversion to politicking, but carries out his work with a sense of duty and service to others, e.g. Washington. Barber noted that the most successful presidents are typically active positive, followed by passive positive, active negative, and finally passive negative. Overview. It is my assertion that President Biden is passive positive, while President Trump is active negative. This difference in presidential character reveals deep philosophical, strategic, and stylistic differences, as well as determines presidential success across varied foreign policy foci. Biden versus Trump. Core foreign policy principles.
Biden as a passive positive president who harbored modest ambitions tended to maintain the traditional U.S. diplomatic norms. His core doctrine was to restore alliances and lead globally through diplomacy and democracy, e.g. strengthen ties and consensus with the G7 and G20. He was a staunch multilateralist who reinvested in global institutions after Trump's first term, e.g. re-engaging diplomatically with the UN. As with previous presidents, he framed foreign policy as a struggle between democracy and autocracy, e.g. reaffirmed commitment to NATO, rallied support for democratic Ukraine. Trump, as an active negative president, is driven and self-interested and given to rigidity and pessimism, which has resulted in his distinct departure from traditional U.S. diplomatic norms. As such, his core doctrine has focused on America First, which prioritizes U.S. sovereignty and economic interests, resulting in him often clashing with allies. This, in turn, makes him skeptical of global institutions, e.g., he has frequently criticized the UN as being ineffective. He thus prefers, instead, to strike bilateral deals, downplaying ideological battles and focusing on deal-making and transactional ties, as in the case of his questioning NATO's relevance and threatening to withdraw unless allies paid more. Biden versus Trump. Tone and style. The president's character also carries over into his tone and style. The passive, positive Joe Biden, who tended to be optimistic and wanted to be loved and ingratiating, was inclined to be a diplomatic, measured institutionalist. As a result, he returned to traditional diplomacy, values norms, and maintained a low-key and controlled means of communication via mainstream and social media. The active negative Donald Trump, who can be overly aggressive and uses power as a means of self-actualization, tends to be blunt, confrontational, and built on personal branding. He has frequently upended norms, prefers unconventional leaders, and forcefully uses social media, Twitter and Truth Social, as a foreign policy tool. Presidential character and foreign policy outcomes. Biden. 1. Military and defense policy. Biden's use of force was targeted strikes and a diplomacy-first approach, which many deem successful for ensuring greater stability after each outcome. However, the chaotic exit of U.S. troops from Afghanistan is deemed a failure as he merely followed the plan left behind by Trump without modifying it to meet the circumstances on the ground. 2. Trade and economic policy. focused on fair labor and environment standards with no major new trade deals, thus a maintenance of the status quo in a positive direction. 3. Regional approaches. China. He maintained a tough stance through retaining Trump-era tariffs, emphasized alliances, AUKUS, Quad, competing on tech, human rights, and national security, which resulted in promoting domestic manufacturing via CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, which many deemed successful. Russia. Biden led the coalition against Russia over Ukraine, imposed sweeping sanctions, and provided strong NATO support. His approach here has been deemed a failure due to the prolonged conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Iran. He tried to revive the Iran nuclear deal. However, talks stalled, resulting in the U.S.'s withdrawal and imposing, quote, maximum pressure sanctions. It is difficult to determine success or failure due to the secrecy around uranium enrichment in Iran. Presidential character and foreign policy outcomes. Trump. Number 1, military and defense policy. Trump's use of force was limited to authorized, high-profile actions, e.g., killing Soleimani, and fewer new interventions, which some deemed a success. However, the negotiated U.S. troop withdrawal deal from Afghanistan with the Taliban in 2020 has been blamed for Biden's chaotic exit. 2. Trade and economic policy. He renegotiated NAFTA into USMCA, has preferred bilateral agreements, and introduced reciprocal tariffs on nearly all the U.S.'s trading partners. The former maintains the status quo, and the bilateral agreements are acceptable in global politics. However, the latter is set to disrupt and reshape the global economy for the worse. 3. Regional approaches. China. Trump withdrew from TPP and blamed China for COVID-19. He started a trade war focused on tariffs and decoupling with an aim to promote domestic manufacturing. Its implementation has been chaotic and, so far, unsuccessful. Russia. Trump has often praised Putin, downplayed Russian interference, resisted harsh penalties, which is viewed negatively by allies and IR specialists. Iran. He withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal during his first term, continued to impose sanctions, demanded Iran's unconditional surrender, and carried out airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites, which has so far been deemed unsuccessful.
Summary. Passive positive Biden has exhibited global leadership through alliances and diplomacy, promoted democracy, human rights, and multilateral order, and was seen as institutional and predictable. His policy outcomes show some measured successes. Active negative. Trump's style is transactional, disruptive, and focused on bilateral advantage. His values are based on U.S. sovereignty, economic nationalism, and anti-globalism. He is deemed unpredictable, using personalized decision-making. His policy outcomes are inconsistent, where the few successes drowned out by unfortunate failures. This all amounts to him harboring big dreams for bringing about accomplishments of large historical scope, in this case, reshaping global politics and economics in his vision. As such, it could be argued that presidential character influence on policy outcomes is as predicted, with the passive positive Biden only slightly outperforming the active negative Trump.